ABC Classic FM's website. Due to copyright restrictions on the music, it's been edited to make this possible.
Margaret Throsby on ABC Classic FM. And this morning it's a case of will the real Bob Gaudio please stand up? At last count, there was something like 20 people who've pretended to be Bob Gaudio around the world. But you can be assured that the real living and breathing original is our guest today. Bob Gaudio is revered in the world of popular music. As a teenager, he wrote his first hit, which earned him, I think, enough to buy a car. And not much later, he and his friend Frankie Valli formed what was to become one of the most popular and successful singing groups of the last half of the 20th century, Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. If you're over, 50, I'm willing to bet that you'll know some of their songs because in their time, the airwaves were saturated with the Four Seasons sound. So what about the pretend Bob Gaudios? Well, they're all people playing Bob in various casts of the astonishingly successful hit musical Jersey Boys, which had its Australian premiere in Melbourne last year and has just opened its Sydney run. The real Bob Gaudio is our guest, and we're beginning with music that was one of those big hits. It was a big hit in its day, and now it's been immortalised in the musical Jersey Boys, You're Just Too Good to Be True. And it was written by our guest today, Bob Gaudio. Good morning.
Good morning.
And welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
Who's singing on? That's the Broadway cast recording,
yes,
isn't it?
That's John Lloyd Young, the original cast of Jersey Boys, and John won a Tony Award for his performance in Jersey Boys.
The soundtrack, or the cast recording won a Grammy, didn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
What a fabulous success after all that time.
Yeah, I had to wait a long time, you know. Took 50 years to write the score for this show.
All right, take us back then. Tell us about the period in which you and Frankie Valli and the two others formed the Four Seasons. What was the sort of soundtrack of those days? What year are we talking about?
I guess 60. We started working the clubs.
Just pre-Beatles?
Yeah, pre-Beatles. In fact, I could make the argument we were one of the first, if not the first, stand-up band that played and sang our own music. We didn't at first. We tried to do what everyone else was doing, the choreography and so on and so forth, and have a backup band. But we played a state fair in, I think maybe Columbus, Ohio, and they had a circus band backing us up with a tuba and clarinets and so on, and we just said, this is not going to work. So we strapped our stuff on and started playing for ourselves from that point on.
But the thing that strikes me when I think about this is that the band, we call them bands now, they were called groups back then, weren't they? The groups of the time, the singing groups, when you think about it, they consisted of either 3 or 4 people, and they were mostly of the same sex. So they were either they were all boys or they were all girls, weren't they? Mostly they were.
For the most part,
I'm trying to think if there were any mixtures.
No, wait a second. Now, the Platters had a female. Zola was her name.
Of course.
I can't remember her last name. So and there may have been another one, and then the Mamas and Papas later on.
And they were, that was the 70s though,
yes,
wasn't it?
That's true.
So when we're talking about the emergence of Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons in 1960, you're talking about a background when Elvis has been king for a while. He's been big as a solo artist.
Right.
But there've been black singing groups, like were the Four Tops around then?
Four Tops were around, the Platters, groups you probably never heard of pre-us, the Gladiolas and Silhouettes and songs like
Silhouettes,
that.
I remember, yeah.
So there were lots of vocal groups, but most of those vocal groups that I know of didn't play their own instruments. That's what I was saying before. There were 4 or 5 people standing out front
in front of
a
the
backup
band.
And it was a different sound.
Which comes out of that, probably that 30s and 40s style of having the big band with the vocalist out the front,
Correct.
isn't it?
Yeah.
So now we have a group with instruments and with singing and with writing your own songs. You'd come out of a band, I think, or a group called the Royal Teens.
Correct.
And I want to know, how did you know Frankie Valli? How did you two meet?
It's in the show, and it's a bit of a surprise, but it's a very famous actor, Academy Award winner, who I played with in a jazz quartet for about a year, a little bit over a year, and we finally decided we were starving. We weren't able to get much work at all, although we were quite good, and he's a terrific guitar player and an excellent singer, and we we decided it was time to pack it in. And he said, there's a kid here that you should meet in Newark who's just a phenomenal singer, and you're a writer, and, this would be a good thing. So we went over Frankie's house and met him, introduced him, and that was kind of the beginning. They were looking for a keyboard player at the time.
How old were you and how old was he?
Frankie's about 7 years older than me, so we do the math. I was 20 maybe.
And he was in his 20s somewhere.
Yeah, 27, 28, something.
The thing that characterised the Four Seasons was the falsetto sound, which was later picked up by the Beach Boys, and also I'm thinking the Gibb brothers too also had a bit of a falsetto sound happening, didn't they?
And Barry paid tribute to Frankie when he found him to sing Grease in the movie.
Did he?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it was, I guess, an inspiration for him in their early days, too.
So did you starve for very long, or were you eating pretty well after a short time?
Well, after joining the Four Seasons, which weren't the Four Seasons, we were called, at the time, the Four Lovers. And we were pretty much the usual cover band, let's say. We did various songs, and we did okay. The Four Lovers had a local following, so me joining them didn't do much for them in that respect until Sherry came along.
Sherry was the first big song.
Yeah.
How big was it?
Oh, it was huge. I think the record was out for a few days and sold 100,000 copies. And in that day, that's a lot of records. In this day now.
In this day they talk about millions, but as a new artist selling 100,000, that's a lot of CDs, a lot of records.
It was one of those records that, I don't consider it one of my best songs, but it was one of those sounds, those records that Frankie's voice and the combination of the harmonies just exploded on the radio. It just jumped out and pinned your ears back.
And everybody loved it. Now, we're talking about a time then in the next few years when the Beatles come along. Mm-hmm. Were they as big in the States as they were everywhere else? So they didn't swamp you?
Well, they did, and I'll tell you exactly how they did. I remember picking up Billboard one morning, and we had our first release on Philips Records. We moved from VJ to Philips, and it was called Dawn. And it was a big record, and I remember looking at Billboard for maybe 3 or 4 weeks. The Beatles were number 1, 3, 4, and 5, and we were number 2. We couldn't go up, we couldn't go down.
Oh, you were squashed.
We were just squashed.
You were sandwiched.
Yeah, absolutely. So they were huge, absolutely.
But you were huge too.
We hung in, and so did the Beach Boys,
Were they around at that time? I thought
they were not too long after us. I don't know, could have been a year, could have been 8 months or so.
Who were your fans? Were they the sort of people that their mothers wanted to lock them up when you were in town, or did the mums and dads like you as well?
I think we had a pretty good cross-section. We had a very strong male audience. It was a little macho, blue-collar. It wasn't an intellectual band, so to speak. We reached for the heart of the people, and we didn't do this intentionally. It's just what we were all about.
You said more than once, and the show talks about this too, about the fact that you weren't glamour boys.
No, by any stretch.
Who were glamour boys? Were the Beach Boys glamorous, do you think?
I
were
think
the Beatles glamorous?
I think the Beatles, certainly. And the Beach Boys had a younger appeal. The Beach Babes and the whole California scene. And they made the front covers of Teen Beat and magazines of that sort. We didn't get any of that. Some of it by choice because we had a pretty sordid background that we didn't want on the street. And the combination of the two kept us in the back.
Can you talk about the sordid background? Because you're talking to an audience across this country, and many of them won't have the opportunity of seeing Jersey Boys.
Okay, well, we're going to get out there and see everybody at some point. But playing, and it's a little bit the Sinatra story, playing clubs from an early age is the predominant ownership of nightclubs in the New Jersey, New York area was mob backed or owned. And you had to rub shoulders.
Did you know that at the time?
We didn't know specifics.
But you weren't innocents abroad, were you?
No, we didn't walk in and say, "Oh my goodness, what are we doing here?" We needed to work, so we would take work. We didn't have to get involved in anything. Of course, there'd always be someone asking for a favorite song of theirs, requests.
And you knew that you had
and
to do
favors, play at somebody's wedding, and so on and so forth, which we did do.
Were you intimidated by this at all?
There's something about that world. There's a certain respect that they have for talent, for music, for songs, for singers. And I don't want to say we were untouched, because we certainly were threatened on a number of occasions for various reasons, which again is in the show. But a couple of occasions where my family was threatened with bodily harm. But for the most part, I'd say we didn't feel that people were looking, had to look over our shoulders all the time.
Were the members of the Four Seasons people with immaculate backgrounds, or no?
I feel like I'm being baited here. No,
Me?
yeah. No, two of Nikki and Tommy did time. I don't know, collectively maybe 5 or 6 years.
And you were very much at pains to keep this from the public, were you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're sort of in the Pat Boone era and things of that sort. Yeah, everything was kind of squeaky.
He was cleaner than clean.
Presley presented a squeaky clean, and I'm sure there's something we could dig into there too. But for the most part, it was more of a PG world. So we felt, rightly or wrongly, that this would not be helpful to make public some of this information.
It's interesting when you talk about that, because when you think about the sort of drug scene, not today's drug scene, but the drug scene then, from what I understand and what I've read about it, it seems to have been the province of people like the Billie Holidays and the people like that. So it was acknowledged that there was a drug scene happening there, but then we have the Pat Boones up against that, who stand up for all that's right and good, don't they?
Yeah.
And you were kind of aligning yourself more with that.
Well, because I came, and so did Frankie. Frankie's a big jazz fan, jazz buff. I think if he had his brothers, he'd been a jazz singer. Just so happened that Sherry came along, because we did a number of jazz tunes in our show, in our set, Moody's Mood for Love, and so on and so forth. So there was a very big drug scene coming from that world in the mid to late 50s.
Were you aware of it?
Yeah, you could.
You couldn't be in the music world and not be aware of it.
We had a very close friend of ours at the time, both Frankie and I. His name was Little Jimmy Scott. I don't know if you're familiar with him or here, but he was just an amazing, soulful jazz singer, and he had a pretty serious heroin problem. So we kind of hung out with him on a number of occasions, and many times helped him get to the club, because he was in pretty bad shape. And he's still alive and doing well, and I think he survived all of that. But that scene was pretty dark. And
you must have had to be fairly steady in yourself.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we weren't angels, but I think all of us stayed clear of the serious heavy drugs. And if someone did it, they did it behind my back, because I didn't see it.
Bob Gaudio is our guest this morning, and your next choice is Stan Kenton. Tell us about this, please.
Stan Kenton comes from a little bit of jazz background, and so I've been a fan of his band since I was a kid, 15, 14, taking piano lessons. And having heard, again, it reminded me, Can't Take My Eyes Off You, preceding this, the horns, and Can't Take My Eyes Off You were very, very much inspired by Stan Kenton in a little piece called Artistry and Rhythm. And if you pay close attention, you'll hear what I'm talking about.
Artistry and Rhythm.
Artistry and Rhythm.
And it was Stan Kenton, but it wasn't the bit that you want. I mean,
It was the little trombone lick. This must be an edited version, but the sound of the horns was the inspiring thing.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Bob Gaudio is our guest. Take us back. Take us right back to your musical beginnings. Did you come from a family that was absolutely rich with music?
You know, I wish I could say that, and I've been looking for them. But no, I had one uncle who was a bass player, and he introduced me to piano teacher Sal Mosca, who pretty much got me going in the right direction.
At what age?
It was about 9.
You had a piano at home?
Yes. And but we used to travel to Mount Vernon. My parents would make an hour-and-a-half round trip to take me to my lesson once a week. And it changed my life.
That's commitment.
Oh, I'll say my mother was totally committed.
Tell me about them, your mum and dad.
My mother, well, I was very introverted. So my mother's way of getting me through that was to play piano. I could be the life of the party. So,
do you remember being introverted?
Oh, yeah. I would much rather have played football. I was on the football team, but playing the piano was, wow, like going to the dentist for me early on. I didn't jump into it, with my arms wide open. But little by little, and after starting to take the lessons with Sal Mosca, it just started to grow.
And practicing, were you able?
Yeah, 2 hours a day. Boy, that was tough.
That was Mum.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was my dad. It was my mom saying, okay, it's time. And my dad was in the doorway. So I didn't have a whole lot of choice.
Between you and the outside?
Yeah, absolutely.
You were born in the Bronx, but you grew up in New Jersey.
Yes.
Whereabouts in New Jersey?
Bergenfield, New Jersey.
And you went to school there?
Went to school there. Left high school at 15 to go on the road with Chuck Berry and Jackie Wilson and Sam Cooke.
With parent approval?
With approval of the principal of the school, which is an interesting, quick story.
Tell us.
My father said, there's no way you're not going to graduate high school. I didn't graduate high school, and you're going to graduate high school, so let's not talk about it. But I don't know what possessed me, but I set up a meeting with the principal and my parents, and I said, I just want a chance to plead my case. We have a hit record, which was Short Shorts, was at the time number 3 or number 2.
That was you and the Royal Team.
Yes, and I was 15. And I presented my case to the principal with my parents, and he actually talked them into letting me leave school, which was astounding. I had no idea that would happen. But he said, look, you can always come back, and an opportunity like this is 1 in a million.
Did you ever go back?
Yeah, I actually got my diploma about a year ago from Bergenfield High School. They did the full ceremony, cap and gown. It was just me. But it was fantastic, and I wish.
Well, you must be their most successful old boy, former pupil.
Probably so, but I was disappointed that the principal was not alive. I was so looking forward to meeting him because just to thank him, and I couldn't find relatives even.
Yeah.
So his name was Paul Hoffmeister, and he changed my life.
How inspired!
Yeah.
I mean, that's because it's pretty dangerous saying to a kid, "No, don't stay at school." And you're the principal.
Yeah.
Don't stay at school. Go on the road with rock and roll. I mean, really.
Exactly. And not only that, but convincing my parents who were adamant about me staying in school. So
they probably thought that you'd get tired of being on the road after 6 months and you'd be back at school.
I almost got tired. It's a pretty rough 8 weeks.
How come you were you fronting for Chuck Berry? Were you?
No, we had our hit record, and we did one song. We did "Who Wears Short Shorts" on the tour.
And that was a song that you'd written.
Yeah, Jackie did a couple. Sam Cooke did a couple. There were like 20 acts at that time. Bo Diddley was on the show. The Everly Brothers. Paul Anka.
You joke.
No, I'm kidding. I'm not kidding. It was 21 acts. It was called Irving Fell's Shower of Stars. And each act did maybe 1, 2, 3 songs. We did one. So we do our song in the beginning of the show, and I get to go see the whole show, sit in the audience.
If I'd been in the United States, I would have been there too.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, what a show!
Yeah, it was a great time.
So when you got back at the end of that, were you a big star by now, or
in high school? We did well. You know, we did well, but it's not as glamorous of a world as you might think. It was exciting to have a hit record, but I don't know. It just, the sense I got was this was a very short road, and I wasn't going to be on it too long. We didn't have a voice, so to speak. You know, we were an instrumental chanting kind of group, and we did that very well, but I didn't feel excited about writing a song with a great melody and for a great singers.
When you talk about writing a song with a great melody, who were your influences songwriting-wise?
I was going from classical, going to jazz, playing jazz, and liking some of the stuff you'll be playing in a bit. I did like some of the early doo-wop stuff, so I was inspired by the Platters and some of the early groups that most people don't know anything about now. They were just emotional records for me, and I put my music background aside, and I mean, to go from playing classical music to writing a song like "Who Wears Short Shorts," I had, you know, a big jump.
But I wonder whether the classical training has had an influence on you.
Yeah, I think it has. There's if you really go through our discography, I think you'll find many moments beginning of our version of "I've Got You Under My Skin."
Who wrote your lyrics?
Bob Crew, for the most part. I wrote some of them, and my wife Judy Parker, Gaudio now, wrote the lyrics of "What a Night," and we co-wrote on "Who Loves You" and did that whole album.
So all these songs in the back of my head as you say their names. There was a song that you wrote for Neil Diamond and Barbra Streisand, "You Don't Bring Me Flowers."
I didn't write it, and I wish the hell I did.
Why do I associate that
Bring
with
Me
you?
Flowers. Neil wrote that. With I produced it. Yeah, I produced the record, and but Neil Diamond wrote it with, oh my gosh, I'm going to forget their names. They'll kill me.
Doesn't matter.
All right, well, we'll find it.
Yeah, we'll find it. We've got the internet on. Because I remember when that came out, I used to play that on the radio, and I remember thinking, what an unusual pairing of Streisand and Neil Diamond. But it worked. It worked very well.
It worked so well, and it was such an experience because although the finished product has strings and orchestra, it was done nose to nose in a studio with Neil and Barbara just vocally making love to each other, you know, and it was just a beautiful moment to watch.
It's interesting when you talk about nose to nose in a studio.
Yeah.
Everything's become very high tech, of course, in these days. I read somewhere about the Andrews sisters used to stand, the four of them, I think there were four Andrews sisters, used to stand around one microphone
Right, absolutely.
and just sing into it.
Well, you know, that's the best way to blend. If you can't hear the other person and their harmony and their inflections, it's just not the same.
It's the same as photoshopped photographs, don't you
Yeah,
think, when you
exactly.
put people
Sure.
into photographs alongside each other?
Sure, in fact, it's difficult for us with the guys in Jersey Boys because they're singing the close harmonies, and they just, because they're off on different parts of the stage and not really able to hear the other person, they have to learn that vocal memory of where to place their voice when they are blending and standing around the piano. It's
not
it's
easy.
a tough one.
Not easy. Can we listen to this now? Because I want to ask you about Frank Sinatra in a moment.
Okay.
But you've chosen him singing a Cole Porter song.
Yes.
Why? Because when did you first meet Sinatra?
When I did the Watertown album, actually, Frankie had become friends with Frank and made the suggestion that he should meet. You know, we should meet and talk about doing something. So.
Well, we'll hear the story after this.
Yeah.
But this is the great, the one and only Frank Sinatra. Just saying what a genius Cole Porter was, writing the words and the lyrics and the music. Frank Sinatra with Porter's "I've Got You Under My Skin," chosen by Bob Gaudio. When you think about Sinatra, what do you think was his greatest gift?
Well, well, his voice, for one thing. He had so much in his voice that had history, you know. It just seemed like he consumed everything that happened before him and added to it. And you know, he was a brilliant musician. He controlled the orchestra. He got the best out of them. There's a few stories I have about that when I did an album with him. But
tell us
the story.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the first song on the Watertown album, it wasn't the first song. We were running down the arrangements, and I had badgered the contractor to make sure we had the best musicians in the city because I knew what would happen if they weren't.
What city are we talking about?
New York.
So they're from the New York Philharmonic, probably.
Yeah, and it was, I thought, the best, and I recognized some faces when they were in. But they started running down the first song we were going to do, and it was just dreadful. It was out of tune, pitch problems in the string section. I said, "Oh my God, I'm dead," you know. And he walked in, and I was up to the church in 30th Street, I think it is. So the studio's upstairs, and the control booth's upstairs, and the studio was on a floor down. He walked in and he looked up, and he walked over and he got on the stand to run it down with him, and they stopped playing, and all of a sudden they started again, and they sounded brilliant. And he just looked up at me and he said, "Gotcha." He set me up.
How did he? Oh.
He set me up. I mean, you know, it was intended for them to play so badly while I was there. And then when he walked in the room, they just were brilliant. So,
oh, that's very
so
sweet.
meanwhile, I was soaking wet and sweating my brains out.
I once, a long while ago, did an interview with Klaus Oderman, who worked with him,
Yeah.
I think, on a South American album that he did with Jobim. And
Mr. Soft, as Sinatra called him.
Mr. Soft. And Sinatra said to the horn players, "I want you to be, you know, softer, softer, softer." And one of the horn players said, "If I play any softer, I'll be dead," you
That's
know.
right.
But he really did know what he wanted.
Oh, he did, and he got more dynamics and brilliance out of any set of musicians I've ever seen. You know, they just came alive.
What was
Just
his-
reached down to their soul.
What was his relationship with the mob?
On any given day. He flirted. They were in and out. He could walk two sides of the street, which was amazing to see. He could sit with the presidents and sit with a mob boss from Chicago. And, again, I think he had a similar situation. You grow up in that world. It's pretty hard to avoid those people in certain situations. So I don't think he was ever threatened in any way, shape, or form. They idolized him. And so he was untouchable.
You've worked with some, I mean, with Streisand, with Sinatra, with Michael Jackson. Was he as talented as it seems he was?
Michael, I think I recorded Michael a couple of songs when he was 15, I believe. And he was the consummate professional and talented.
Driven by the family?
Pardon me?
Driven by the family? Driven by the father?
I didn't get that sense. He showed up by himself, no entourage, in Motown Studios in L.A., and he was just like any other great talent.
Do you see him as a victim, a tragic sort of figure?
Yeah, and I, you can't blame them. Ultimately, you have to accept the blame for your own mistakes. And he fell into a place, I don't know why or how, because he was just beyond special. Why it took the course it did, I don't know.
Bob, talking about the songs that you've written in your career, and there've been so many of them, are they songs? I know you've written mostly the music, and Bob Crew's written the lyrics. But are they mostly love songs, or are they songs that address issues, or are they songs that are of their time, or how would you define them?
Yeah, I would say love songs. That's the simplest thing for me to say. There have been times where we've made a few statements, but by and large, it's all about heart and passion and reaching someone's soul. And sometimes we were on track and sometimes we weren't. And when we were on track, we had some memorable moments. So, it's hard for me to analyze. I wish I could sit down and figure this out. Because, I've jumped around musically from Short Shorts to Can't Take My Eyes Off You to Oh, What a Night. Ragdoll. Unlike, say, Burt Bacharach, who you can identify a good portion of his music with rare exceptions. I don't know that you can identify mine, and that's what's probably one of the more affecting parts of Jersey Boys is the fact that most people don't put all these songs together in one little camp.
Yes,
You
yes.
just hear the songs
And you
and know
think,
the songs.
oh my God, did they write this? Yeah.
And that's pretty much what comes out from people that have seen the show. So, Sun Ain't Gonna Shine is one of my favorite songs that I wrote, but that's far removed from some of the ones we just mentioned. But that's where I am at the time and place, and that's just what comes out.
Is it easy?
Sometimes.
Is it
Sherry
hard?
was easy. Ragdoll was a nightmare. I've never spent 3 or 4 weeks working on a song, but we just couldn't finish it. I had Bob Crew and I brought Bob in to work on the lyric. I had half of it done, and I couldn't get it. I just couldn't wind it up.
You got yourself a hit.
Yeah, we knew we had something, but we couldn't finish it, and we finally got it out.
We'll talk about Jersey Boys next, but let's listen to this. This is Eric Carmen. I love Eric Carmen.
Yeah,
he's not as well known perhaps as some people, but I've always loved him.
Well, this song should be.
What is it?
This is All By Myself, which is based on a Rachmaninoff.
That's Eric Carmen and All By Myself, written by our guest today, Bob Gaudio. We're just saying that there's a sort of suggestion in there of Queen that was to come.
Yeah, I think Freddie Mercury and the boys have done a few things that
middle part of the song,
the
particularly.
middle part, the classical orchestrations, and MacArthur Park, as we were saying, is also in that world.
Yeah, Bob, Jersey Boys, whose idea was it?
Jersey Boys originally rattled around in my brain after seeing a movie called The Deer Hunter. There's a moment in The Deer Hunter that uses Can't Take My Eyes Off You in the pool hall before they ship out. And that just was so striking for me to hear one of my songs in a movie like that. It just stayed with me. So it was the first time I thought, maybe our music transcends radio, and there's some other place we can do other things and visuals and stuff. So I had my sights set on a theater piece way back then. Never got to the point where it was the timing was right or we could make it work. And little by little, I did a musical called Peggy Sue Got Married that was at the Shaftesbury in London, and it just pulled me into the theater. And Des McAnuff, coincidentally, I spoke with him about producing that movie, directing that movie, that musical, but he wasn't available. But he said, I'm a big fan. The first album I bought was Sherry and 11 Others. If you ever want to do a musical, let me know, find me. And that's the short of it is, we did.
So it opened in 2005, and it's been seen all over the place, hasn't
it opened in La Jolla, Beach Boy territory, La Jolla, California, of all places, and it was just an instant successful.
Why do you think?
Well, first off, let's put the music aside. It's in my opinion, a brilliantly written, directed, the lighting, the choreography. It's just the special moment. It's the perfect storm. Everybody involved just came together. And, those are rare moments where everything works. And I have to say, this is one of those times in my career.
What's it like? What was it like the very first time you sat in the audience and saw the completed work?
Frankie and I were both there. And it was probably more difficult for me than Frankie because I knew what was coming a little bit. I saw some rehearsals and I knew the moment. There were some dark moments, and I didn't know how he was going to handle some of the darker moments because they're about his child. And
because he lost a child.
He lost a child, yes. And so it was tough, but it was joyful because we both looked at each other at intermission and said, my God, if this ever gets to Broadway. Well, yeah, to get that kind of response in La Jolla, California was stunning.
Before I say goodbye to you have to tell me the story that you call your slap yourself in the face moment. Do you remember what I'm talking about? When somebody asked you that they could use Can't Take My Eyes Off You in a film?
Oh, yes. No. Actually, it was Big Girls Don't Cry.
Oh, Big Girls Don't Cry.
Yeah, it was Big Girls Don't Cry. It was in Dirty Dancing, the movie. And I got a call from an old friend, Jimmy Einer, and he said, I need a favor. I'd like to use Big Girls Don't Cry in a film. It's low budget. We don't have any money. And, you try and keep a standard for films and with your catalog. And I said, well, I'll find something we can do, but I don't think I can do what you'd like us to do. And he said, I want it in the soundtrack, and I want it in the movie. He's going to open the movie.
See you tomorrow,
I said,
Kenny.
I tell
Have
you
a
what,
good
you
one,
can
all
have it
right?
to open the movie, but you can't put
You
it
too,
in the
Kenny.
soundtrack.
Behave yourself.
How many did the soundtrack
Oh my
sell?
God, I don't know.
I've
It's
read
like 10,
42
12,
million.
40, yeah. But interestingly enough, I called him when they were putting out Dirty Dancing 2. And I got on the phone with him and he said, don't say a word, you're in the second album.
Oh, it's a lovely story. Okay, you've chosen as your last to say goodbye to us, Ray Charles and Betty Carter.
One of my all-time favorites.
Why?
It just makes me cry, you know, and that's always good once in a while.
Big boys don't cry.
Yeah, well, I do.
Every time we say goodbye, another Cole Porter song, and it was Ray Charles and Betty Carter, the final choice of our guest today, Bob Gaudio, and the show Jersey Boys is on its Sydney run. It opened last weekend. Tomorrow we're looking at what's described as the lost story of Britain's convict disaster in Africa and how it led to the settlement of Australia. Emma Christopher has uncovered the most extraordinary story of how Britain devised a plan of dumping convicts because the prisons were overcrowded and the hulks on the Thames were overcrowded. Not in far distant Botany Bay.